Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 670 for December 3rd, 2017. Coming up in a few minutes.
I had a picture sent to my phone Wednesday while I was at work.
Hey, get excited!
We're way too tired to get excited. I had a terrible day at work because I already knew before I even left Grand Junction that I wasn't first in line. I knew I was going to be, at best, third.
I'm just back from Denver, Colorado, where Stranahan's Distillery held its annual Snowflake edition release party Saturday morning, and people started lining up last Wednesday morning to get a bottle. Why? We'll get some of their answers and talk with Stranahan's master distiller Rob Dietrich later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. I'll also have the calendar of events, this week's Your Voice, and the What I'm Tasting This Week department, all coming up on this week's WhiskyCast.
WhiskyCast, brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot-still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
The holidays are a time to celebrate, to share something special with friends and family. This year, why not consider sharing something truly special? An engraved bottle of Johnnie Walker Blue Label. Support for WhiskyCast comes from Johnnie Walker. Visit johnnywalker.com to find out more about engraving options near you.
Let's get started with the week's news. It's brought to you by Highland Park. Another new distillery has opened in Scotland, and this one is unique for a very unusual reason. The Glen Wyvis Distillery in Dingwall may well be the first distillery yet to complete a successful crowdfunding campaign to cover the construction costs. More than 3,000 people have invested a total of £3.8 million so far, that's about $5.1 million, to make John Mackenzie's dream of bringing whiskey production back to Dingwall for the first time since the old Ben Wyvis and Glenskiach distilleries closed back in 1926.
This project is 5 years in the making. My history is as an army officer, helicopter pilot and farmer. And I started flying to whiskey distilleries 15 years ago. And it was then 5 years ago, I really dug into the history of my own area. And I was doing a lot of flying to whiskey distilleries then. And I realised that there was this huge interest in Scotch malt whiskey and the liquid gold effectively that was being laid down in casks and this history that existed on the edge of my hometown of Dingwall. So at the same time, I was involved in another project, crowdfunding money for a wind turbine. And we raised £1 million from 200 people for that particular project. And I thought, maybe we could build a distillery and crowdfund it in the same manner. Obviously, whiskey is the most difficult startup to make a product, which, it goes up in value over time, but the initial cash outlay means that it's not feasible for the normal person. But if you bring 3,000 normal people together, then it is feasible, and that was the idea. Slowly but surely, the hurdles that were in front of me. The first one was planning, coming up with a name for the distillery. I got past these, and then putting together a board of directors that I thought could assist the fundraising part. Now, to raise $2.6 million in our first share offer from April to 8th of July last year, over 77 days, it was like running a marathon every day for 77 days. So to raise $2.6 million, it's not for the faint-hearted. It's the largest amount ever raised for a community project in Scotland and the UK. It's in the top 5 crowdfunding projects in the UK, and I believe it's in the top 30 in the world. So these are big sums of money to ask people to contribute, to get involved. It's not just raising a few £1,000s is hard enough, but when you're getting into the millions, it's a serious business. But ultimately, the community, which is Scotch malt whisky enthusiasts that exists in Scotland and the world, that's what really, I had this hunch that they would all come together and want to get ownership of a distillery for the first time. It had never been allowed to happen before because, of course, if you can afford one, and you've got the you've got the drive, the future profits are potentially very high. So any hard-nosed businessman will potentially want to get to that. But I thought this was a nicer way and a fairer way that we could do something that was a bit different, that would assist my hometown and put distilling back at the heart of it. So that took us up to last year when we raised the money. And then the real work started, which was, of course, getting all the final costings in and starting construction. And lo and behold, from August the 1st, when we drew down everyone's money that we had crowdfunded, to the 30th of November this year, so just over a year, it's remarkable. August to 30th of November, we have built a Scotch malt whisky distillery.
The distillery is in a second phase of crowdfunding now to cover future needs and the addition of a gin distillery. Former Mortlach distiller Duncan Tate signed on last month to be the distillery manager. He's also invested in the project. The saga of Australia's Nant distillery continues, and there are now indications that Nant's founders may have been in financial trouble since at least 2014. The Mercury in Australia cites a report from Deloitte, which has been liquidating some of Nant's assets. Deloitte's Richard Hughes told the Mercury that there's evidence Nant may have been insolvent since June of 2014, but that more investigations would be needed to draw, quote, definitive conclusions. Police in Tasmania are investigating Nant's barrel sales investment scheme, which promised investors that it would buy their barrels of new-make spirit back at maturity with a guaranteed annual return. As we've reported before, audits by Australian Whisky Holdings after it acquired the Nant estate earlier this year found hundreds of barrels that had been sold were never actually filled with spirit. The Deloitte report also found that founder Keith Batt and his wife Margaret may have transferred significant amounts of money between the various Nant Group companies and may themselves owe Nant as much as 1.4 million Australian dollars, about $1.1 million US, for what the audit termed unreasonable director-related transactions. The Bats have not been available for comment and have declined all of our requests for interviews this year. From the world of politics now, while there are a lot of people criticizing the tax reform bill that passed the U.S. Senate early Saturday morning, distillers are not among that group. The Senate bill included the language distillers have been looking for to reduce the excise taxes they pay on their spirits, along with other changes that benefit the industry. The House has yet to pass its version of a tax reform bill. Differences between the two bills would have to be worked out in a conference committee. And speaking of distillers and politics, I mentioned a couple of months ago that P.T. Wood of Wood's High Mountain Distillery in Salida, Colorado, had decided to run for mayor. Got word the other day that he won the election. Congratulations, P.T., and let us know when you change your phone number. We have lots of new whiskeys to mention this week, and we'll start with another rarity from Bowmore, which has released the third edition in its Vault Legends collection, a 50-year-old single malt distilled back in 1966. That was the same year that longtime distillery manager Eddie McCaffer started working at Bowmore. He retired last year, and just 74 bottles of the one remaining cask from 1966 have now been bottled. The price tag, $30,000 each. There's also a new Orphan Barrel release from Diageo. For the first time, the Orphan Barrel series has expanded outside of Kentucky. Entrapment is a 25-year-old Canadian whiskey from the Crown Royal Distillery in Gimli, Manitoba. Earlier this year, Ewan Morgan and the Orphan Barrel team within Diageo were asking their production colleagues around the company to look for batches of whiskey that, getting into the Christmas spirit here, might be destined for the so-called Island of Misfit Toys. Not because they were bad, but because they just didn't have a home.
Actually, the blending team at Crown Royal came to us and said, hey, we have this 25-year-old batch base distillate from 92. We don't really know what to do with it. We could release it as a Crown Royal special release, but we don't really have that much of it. Do you think it would be a good fit for Orphan Barrel? And we obviously said yes, it would be a perfect fit for Orphan Barrel. So they showed us some samples of it, When we got it, it was actually a higher ABV than what it's being put out at. We got it, I think, just about 74.9 when we tasted it. And it was incredible. That creaminess is there. The backbone of Crown Royal is really the base whiskies that give it that distinct creaminess. And then you have your flavoring whiskies on top of that, your bourbon style, the rye style, and of course the coffee rye style that they've released previously. So we were very excited at the opportunity, but obviously there's not an awful lot of it, and that's why it fit the orphan barrel model perfectly, because we could take it down to Tullahoma, we can hand bottle it there like all the other orphan barrels, and then we can get it out to the whiskey bars and the whiskey nerds and all of those good folks who love the orphan barrel brand. So we were over the moon when they offered it to us.
Where is this going to be available?
Nationally. So it's, as with all the others, it's extremely allocated. There isn't an awful lot of it, and it's going to be the whole of North America, whole of United States.
When you say all of North America, does that include Canada? Do they get some of this?
No. That's a little bit of a sore point. Thanks for bringing that up. No, they do not. It's only in the United States.
Why?
Why? Because there isn't enough, is the honest answer. We have a fairly established customer base with Orphan Barrel, and it's only currently in America, United States. So in order for us to, scale things up, we would have to do much larger batches. And unfortunately, we're constrained by the amount of liquid that we have. And we literally only had one batch of this. So once this one is gone, that's it. There's only going to be one entrapment.
Entrapment is bottled at 41% ABV and will carry a recommended retail price of $150 a bottle in the U.S. I received a sample the other day, and I'll have tasting notes for it soon at whiskycast.com. Meanwhile, Johnny Walker is out with a new version of Blue Label. The Ghost and Rare Edition is a new blend that uses whiskeys from just 8 different distilleries, including the so-called ghost distilleries of Brora, Pittyvake, and the old Cambus Grain Distillery. It's the first in a new series of Blue Label bottlings that will use whiskeys from long-closed distilleries. This one will sell for about $400 a bottle in the U.S. and £220 a bottle in the U.K. I'll have my tasting notes for it later on. Back in October, we mentioned that Jameson has been working on an Irish Pale Ale version of its Caskmates expression, and I suggested at the time that it might become a permanent part of the range, given the reception that the test release received in Ireland. It's official now. The Caskmates IPA edition will be available in the U.S. starting this month and in Ireland during January. You'll find my tasting notes for it at whiskycast.com. Glenglassaugh is out with a new collection of rare single cask bottlings. All 8 whiskeys were distilled between 1965 and 1986, when the distillery was mothballed. No word on pricing. And its sister distillery, Ben Riach, has released a new 21-year-old single malt. This one was matured originally in ex-bourbon casks and then finished in a combination of red wine, PX sherry, and virgin oak casks. It's an unpeated whiskey, but it'll be followed early next year by a peated version. Once again, no word on pricing. The English Whiskey Company has released its first 10-year-old single malt. It's a single cask bottling available from the distillery for £185, around $250 a bottle. Just 210 bottles are available. Joe Beatrice's team at Barrel Whiskey has come up with an unusual blend for batch number 2 of Barrel Rye. They took a 100% 5-year-old malted rye whiskey distilled in Poland and blended it with a rye whiskey distilled at MGP in Indiana with a high malted barley content. It's bottled at 58.75% ABV. Heaven Hill is out with the 3rd release this year of Elijah Craig Barrel Proof. Batch number C917 is bottled at 65.5% ABV, and I'll have my tasting notes for it soon at whiskycast.com. Of course, the second batch of Elijah Craig Barrel Proof was named by Whiskey Advocate a couple of weeks ago as its 2017 Whiskey of the Year. Finally, we can't let this week end without the story of the bourbon-loving opossum. The critter crawled through the roof of a liquor store in Fort Walton Beach, Florida the other night, and apparently knocked over a bottle of bourbon on the way in. The opossum then proceeded to, as store owner Cash Moore told the Associated Press, drink the whole damn bottle. They found her the next morning sleeping it off next to the broken glass. The possum was treated at a local wildlife refuge for a few days, then released back into the wild. No, they did not give her a name. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com. The news is brought to you by Highland Park, the Orkney single malt with Viking soul, and a perfect holiday gift for a fellow whiskey lover, with a wide range of expressions to suit every taste and every budget. Check them out today at a whiskey shop near you, and get more details at highlandparkwhiskey.com.
You don't need a special occasion to open a bottle of Johnnie Walker Blue Label. But when you have a special occasion, why not celebrate with a specially engraved bottle of Johnnie Walker Blue Label? Here's how one whiskey lover celebrated his team's recent success. He arranged to have 108 specially engraved bottles of Johnnie Walker Blue Label made for his co-workers. You might say he hit a home run. Just like a perfectly executed double play, Johnnie Walker Blue Label is smooth and well-rounded, and unlike a trophy, never needs polishing. Support for WhiskyCast comes from Johnnie Walker. Visit johnnywalker.com to find out more about engraving options near you.
Johnnie Walker Blue Label Blended Scotch Whiskey, 40% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
You may have heard recently about the so-called net neutrality issue. On December 14th, the Federal Communications Commission will hold a public meeting on its proposal to remove current regulations that require Internet service providers to treat all content equally. While this is a U.S. issue, it could have an impact on content providers like us worldwide if companies like Comcast and Verizon are allowed to charge for priority access to their customers. We've posted a commentary on the impact of ending net neutrality at whiskycast.com, and I hope you'll take a minute to read it this week. Now let's open up the inbox for this week's Your Voice, brought to you by Lot 40. Heard from Tyrone Cote of Halifax, Nova Scotia, at TCote on Twitter, following last week's interview with Malcolm Waring of Old Pulteney. Thanks, WhiskyCast, for the great interview with Malcolm Waring of Old Pulteney Malt. I enjoyed the stories of life in Wick and OP's sister distilleries. Of course, Tyrone was one of the panelists on the latest episode of the WhiskyCast Tasting Panel podcast. You can download it from iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts from, and of course, at whiskycast.com. John Gromer, at jgromer on Twitter, asked this question the other day. Hi, Mark. My wife is going to Tokyo next week for work. Do you know of any good whiskey shops that have a good selection? She's looking to get us a nice bottle of Japanese whiskey. Well, I have not been to Tokyo, but I know some of our listeners have, so I called out Dave Broom on Twitter, who just wrote one of the definitive books on Japanese whiskey, and Dave responded with his recommendations. Shinanoya has many branches, Isetan is very good, and Liquors Hasegawa underneath the Tokyo station is worth a visit if you can find it. Meanwhile, Dave Smith at Measure of Whiskey on Twitter also recommended Shinanoya and Liquors Hasegawa, and Mark's Whiskey Whistle at Whiskey Whistle on Twitter suggested that John's wife should look for one of the Liquor Mountain stores in Tokyo as well. Thanks for your help, guys. John, please let us know what your wife brings back for the two of you. I have mentioned before that I'm usually on Quora.com at least once a week answering questions about whiskey. This week, I was asked to answer this one. Are travel retail single malt Scotch bottlings, available only in duty-free shops, just a marketing gimmick or worth taking seriously? If they're so good, why not release it as a regular list expression? And here's my answer. Yes, they are worth looking at. Here's why. Travel retail operators like to carry products that aren't always available at regular whiskey shops. And most of the whiskey brands that focus on travel retail usually have a complete separate line of expressions just for that market, and the airport shops are about the only place you'll find them. Now, travel retail is also a good place to find unusual expressions that might not work as a regular list expression. I cited in that Quora answer the example of the 6-grain Jim Beam Signature bourbon that Beam released a few years ago. It was an experimental product that Beam only had about 3,000 bottles of, and that wasn't enough at the time to put it into the regular distribution system for a one-time offering. So they sent it into the travel retail system, and it sold out easily. I still have a bottle of Jim Beam Signature and poured it at a tasting the other night. If you have a question, a suggestion, or something else you'd like to get off your chest, you can always post it on the Your Voice page at whiskycast.com. We're always around on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr at WhiskyCast, and you can even record a voice memo on your smartphone and email it to us. The address is comments@whiskycast.com, and you just might hear your question on the show. This week's Your Voice is brought to you by Lot 40, Canada's award-winning 100% pot still rye whiskey. Lot 40, unapologetically Canadian. Please drink responsibly. Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events. Bonham's has its final whiskey auction of the year in Edinburgh, Scotland, this Wednesday, December 6th. The New York Times is sponsoring a panel discussion on Women in Whiskey, Sisters in Suds, this Thursday night at the Republic Restoratives Distillery in Washington, D.C. Chattanooga Whiskey has an open house at its new Riverfront Distillery in Chattanooga, Tennessee, December 9th. Nichols & Perks is sponsoring a tasting of this year's Diageo special releases with Colin Dunn coming up on December 14th in Birmingham, England. The Virginia Craft Spirits Roadshow will be on the 16th at the A. Smith Bowman Distillery in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and the Brandy Library in New York City will wind up 2017 with a tasting of the year's best whiskeys on December 30th. Right now, we have 131 different events on our searchable calendar at whiskycast.com. If you have a tasting or a festival coming up, just use the contact form on our website and let us know all about it.
Redbreast fans have always cherished our whiskey's sherry notes, so we set out to embellish that character. Introducing the Redbreast Listowel edition, a quintessential single pot still Irish whiskey finished in first fill Oloroso sherry casks from Spain's prestigious Bodegas Listowel. Carrying Redbreast's trademark pot still spices and dark dried fruit notes, the Listowel edition is graced with an enduring sherry finish that would be better described as a final act. Discover the newest branch on the Redbreast family tree.
This week's WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Lagavulin. I was in Denver this weekend, where Stranahan's held its release party Saturday morning for its annual Snowflake edition. Now, the party was officially on Saturday morning, but it actually started early Wednesday morning. That's when Mike Kirchhoff, his wife Lynn, and Derek Hayden pulled up with their RV on Kalamath Street in front of the distillery to be first in line, surprising master distiller Rob Dietrich and the entire Stranahan's team. They left Wisconsin Tuesday afternoon and drove about 985 miles to Denver in what's become an annual pilgrimage.
Well, this is my third year being in line for Snowflake, so there wasn't really any question that I was coming. It was more of a question of when we were coming, more than anything else. Because we wanted, last year we were 11th and 12th in line, and we wanted to be in the top 10. And so it was just a question of when we were going to leave. I mean, as soon as it was over last year, we were at breakfast and we were strategizing what we were going to do to be here this year. And, to figure out when we needed to be here to, be early in the line.
When did you guys get here?
We left Janesville at 12:30 on Tuesday and arrived here about 5:30 Wednesday morning.
So you guys have been here basically Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday for close to 4 days now.
That's correct. Yep. Wouldn't have it any other way.
I know Rob came out to greet you guys when you got here because he was surprised too, right?
Yes. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, and there's a group of folks who've always been in the top 10 for the last several years. They were surprised, and that was the whole point. We didn't want to let anybody know we were coming really early because we wanted the chance to be in the top 10, number one, but we were shooting for, first in line. So at quarter till 6 when we rolled up here in the dark, Wednesday morning and saw we were first in line. First thing we did was throw chairs right here. Then we set up camp.
The truck didn't even get out of park before Mike was, or out of gear before Mike was jumping out and throwing the chairs up. He's like, ah!
What did Rob say when he saw you guys?
Oh, man, well,
He was something like,
he
wow,
says,
you guys are early.
Russell's going to be pissed.
Russell is Russell Condon of Grand Junction, Colorado. He's been first in line 3 times and in the top 10 for 7 of the last 9 years. Russell and his girlfriend, Jenna Rhodes, showed up Wednesday night. And yeah, Rob was right at first.
These guys definitely earned first place this year. They earned it.
Tell me the story when you saw these guys when you showed up out here.
I had a picture sent to my phone Wednesday while I was at work.
Get excited!
We're way too tired to get excited. I had a terrible day at work because I already knew before I even left Grand Junction that I wasn't first in line. I knew I was going to be at best third, and I had no idea how many people were in their party. I had no idea how many people were in front of me. And I knew that no matter what I did, I couldn't get to the front of the line. And I've been in the front of the line 3 times. I've been in the top 10 7 times. This is my 9th release.
Why?
Obsession. It's some people are passionate about whiskey, and I started doing this, and I escalated because I wanted to be at the front of the line. Same thing, bucket list. I'm like, I want to be at the front of the line, and then I got there, and I'm like, I want to be at the front of the line again. And again, and again, and I just keep going earlier. I just keep adding about 12 hours to my camping trip every year. And I started out on Saturday morning and then ended up at Wednesday night. And I just keep pushing it further and further. And it keeps getting more and more fun every year. So now I'm more inclined to add more time to the trip and come out for 3-4 days at a time. Just to do the camping part of it, just to hang out with all these guys and see friends that I only see once a year.
Tell me what you said when you saw these guys, because from what they've told me, there was threats made about throwing chairs out in the street, burning them, certain 4-letter words that were used.
I was going to say, I can't repeat on camera what I said in the car when we got here, but yeah, there was a little bit of temper tantrum thrown. There was a little bit of stone kicking and a lot of the
Wait
fuming.
A second. Get in here.
Fuming.
Come on, get in here.
She told the story. She's like, "Oh, you should have seen him." She squealed on me to these guys. She told them everything. I was upset. I was frustrated and angry, and I was like, "Where am I going to put my tent?" And it's just the way the camper was situated, and the sidewalk, and the passageway for the pedestrians, and the parking, and there's just so many things, and it's 10 o'clock at night, and I've worked all day, and I'm tired, and I'm exhausted, and I'm maybe top 10. There was a tent, there was chairs, there was a camper. I had no idea how many people this represented, and I was freaking out because I've been top 10, and I came over, Wednesday night. I'm still here 3 days early, and 3 days to not be in the top 10 is just excruciating. So yeah, I was definitely throwing a tantrum, and kind of after I got some sleep and calmed down, and I met these guys, and they're just the nicest guys. These guys are absolutely fantastic. Yeah.
Okay, now if you're going to keep throwing words in here, you got to come over here and talk.
Breaking down camp.
What?
I said one of us has to start breaking down camp.
Yeah. So once I met these guys, and we got to that first morning chat and had some coffee, and Jenna calmed me down. Jenna got yelled at because she told me to not be angry, but yeah, she tried.
So what did you tell me the real story of what he said?
No, I'm not repeating.
It's like just going
That's not
on TV.
happening.
There was a lot of there was all the 4-letter words.
There was a lot of 4-letter words. Yep. And about a minute and a half of him literally standing there like this with his arms crossed, just
glaring. Yeah, I did.
Yeah. So.
There was a lot of fuming.
There was.
A lot of scowling.
And I'm like, hey, babe, you've been doing this for a while. You're part of Stranahan's. You're promoting their label. It means that whether or not you like them, you need to be a good person, be friendly. He just looks at me and she goes, shut up.
Don't even.
Don't even go there.
Thanks for making me look good.
That all on your own.
You know, I went out there to greet him Thursday morning when we got up, and I just went and said hi and said, hey. He says, so you had to take my spot, huh? I said, well, we got here to be in the top 10. That was our goal is. And within about 45 minutes of that, of discussing things, he says, hey, we're going to go grab some breakfast down at Denny's. You want to come?
Yeah.
So we joined him for breakfast, and he bought.
Mike and Lynn have a daughter in Denver, and Russell even helped them move some furniture for her during the wait. Keep that in mind a few minutes from now. Why all the fuss over this whiskey? I sat down with Rob Dietrich in the Stranahan's tasting room for a chat.
Was this something you came up with? Was it a Jess Graber creation from back in the day? What's the story on Snowflake?
It's a Jess Graber creation. So Jess Graber started out with doing a little messing around with some cask finishes. The very first 3 Snowflakes he actually released at the same time. So the first Snowflake was a Hungarian white oak cask finish. Then there was a port cask finish and a Cab Franc cask finish. All single barrel and all separate different cask finishes. I actually have one bottle of every Snowflake all the way through all the batches, which is kind of fun to see how it's evolved from those days.
And those are really rare now, aren't they?
They're super rare. Each barrel holds only around 250 bottles or so. So if any of those are still floating around, they're worth some money, I'm sure.
This has become sort of an annual tradition, that first Saturday of December, hasn't it?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. So first Saturday, we always feel it's a great time to be able to release it before the Christmas, the holiday season. It's still warm enough to wait outside in line, which we never really anticipated in the first place. We were always excited about how it evolved. I think it really gained in popularity. We just had a busy day at the gift store, and then eventually people started. It might be 2 or 3 people waiting for the gift store to open, and then as it started growing, people started waiting in line earlier and earlier. It started at 10 o'clock at night, and then it just kept on going. And so the first guys got in line this year on Wednesday at 5:30 in the morning. They got here. They drove out from Wisconsin to be able to get their hands on a couple of bottles of Snowflake.
Why did they come all the way from Wisconsin?
It's interesting. Snowflake has got its reputation has just kind of grown. And what's interesting about it is that, as in nature, no 2 Snowflakes are alike. So it's always going to be a unique batch. It's always going to be something that I create a little bit differently. What I did differently from the way Jess started it was taking cask finishes and starting to marry them together. For example, this particular cask finish is 3 rum barrels. Rum cask finishes, a Sangiovese cask finish, a Madeira cask finish, a cognac cask finish, and a port cask finish. And this is all married together to create the flavor profile.
7 different cask finishes?
Correct, of different ages. So for example, the rum barrels were only 6 months cask finishing. The cognac was 2 years cask finishing. The Sangiovese was I think a year and a half. So all at different ages of their own finish, and then I always create it by nose and taste. I'll get samples from all those bottles, and I'll start nosing them and seeing which samples are going to go together. If I smell this, this would smell great with this, and this noses well with this. So I'll kind of set these over here. So I'll create I might create a dozen or 2 dozen batches, samples, before I pick the one that I want to release.
Because with 7 different finishes in there, this has the potential to be a real train wreck if you don't balance it right.
Exactly. You really could. You could go off the rails very, very easily. And it really, how it came about was I'd been marrying together all the barrels. They were tasting really good, but it was missing an ingredient, almost like cooking. You're tasting the stew, and you're thinking it's just missing some ingredient. And literally the last barrel that I added to it to create 7 barrels was the Sangiovese barrel. It just was a really mind-blowing flavor profile, and that just rounded the whole thing out.
I don't recall many people ever trying a Sangiovese cask finish to begin with. What prompted you to try that with a whiskey?
I always like getting my hands on unusual casks. You never know what you're going to get out of a cask finish. I've been working on getting my hands on some tequila barrels and just seeing what that's going to do to the whiskey. It might not taste good. It might be something I'm sitting on that is just not going to taste good for a while, and I'll have to figure out what to do with it at some point down the road. But you don't know until you try. And so the idea was to always get my hands on unique casks and see what they're going to do.
Now, sherry casks aren't unique, but you came out with a sherry cask finished Stranahans for the first time.
Correct.
Just a few weeks ago.
Yep, that's correct. And that was really kind of born out of the Snowflake program. Creating the Snowflake batches. I've used sherry barrels in the past. Sherry married with Tempranillo and Malbec. Things that kind of brought it together. But I've never had one that was just completely sherry cask finish. And I just always loved the flavor of the sherry cask, and I thought, and I get asked all over the country. People, always ask me, when are you going to have Snowflake as a national release? And I tell them, well, never. It's a Colorado thing. You got to come to the distillery. That's part of the adventure of that whiskey, is to be able to come out to the distillery and share in the adventure of Snowflake. However, I saw that there was a niche that could definitely be filled with that, and so the sherry cask is something that's was been working on for several years. It's 4-year-old Stranahans that's aged in white American oak barrels with number 3 char, virgin oak. And then we'll take those barrels and from that point transfer them over into 500-liter Sherry Oloroso butts from the Andalusia region of Spain. And so so I'll do a Solera cask finishing, Solera style cask finishing for several months in those barrels. It just creates some really rich flavors.
You mentioned the nationwide availability
of
Stranahans, and that's something we have to at least address, because for a couple of years at least after Proximo acquired the brand from Jess, they took Stranahans out of the national market and kept it here in Colorado because you didn't have the supply.
Exactly, absolutely. And as I like to, just quoting Jess, Jess says, I never knew I could run out of whiskey, and that was it was a real problem. Suddenly it started to get popular, and we thought, well, we got to take care of the home market first. And in the meantime, let's add more fermenters, let's add more stills. We're not changing the recipe. We're just creating more of the whiskey and adding more barrel space, and that way we could just start throwing more barrels in the pile, so that we were able to release enough whiskey to be able to handle the national market and start reaching out into the global market, hopefully at some point.
When do you expect that to happen?
The global, we are in Canada, so that's a good first start for a national or international approach. But I think one of the things that I have been really adamantly just trying to establish and working with some other distilleries on is creating an American single malt category, specifically so that we can be recognized in the global market. We have. You can look at a Scotch and know, oh, that's a single malt produced in Scotland, or that is a Japanese single malt that has the word, you understand it's from Japan. In order to have a global identity, we felt that it was important to create a category. If you look up the TTB website, that federally regulates alcohol, there's a category of whiskey, and under whiskey there are types, and under those types there are 41 types of whiskey that are recognized in the United States, and so. And that is Japanese single malt or Scotch, and of course Scotch by region. So we felt it was really necessary to create an American single malt category. We felt that was very important to be able to be globally recognized. And so we helped form the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission. There are other single malt whiskey distilleries around the country that we are all pushing to create this American single malt whiskey category, and not only that, but to create by region, so Pacific Northwest single malt or Rocky Mountain single malt. So that is really, for us, the way to get that global identity.
Where does that stand in terms of getting the TTB to actually sign off on it?
Well, it is dealing with the government. So I'm a former soldier, so I know about the hurry up and wait. So sometimes it does take a little bit of time, especially when there's a change in the leadership, when the presidency changes. Doesn't matter who is in office, there's always a shift of offices, of those positions, and so that's kind of slowed things up a little bit for us as well.
Are you already thinking about next year's?
Not yet. I want to get through this one, but in a way, yes. I already know that I went rum cask heavy on this, but then of course having the Sangiovese and the Madeira, and the cognac and the port created this kind of roundness of the whiskey. So I went rum heavy on on purpose. I already knew that's the direction I wanted to go.
But next year?
Next year, it depends on what kind of barrels I can get my hands on this year. I've got a friend of mine who's a barrel broker that I can get some pretty unique barrels from all over the world, and I always ask him to keep his eye out for those really unique barrels. So that's for me. That is, if I can find something pretty cool and unique, I might head in a different direction.
Is this the fun part of the job?
Absolutely. This is where I get to paint outside the lines. This is making whiskey art. My job as a master distiller and the steward of the whiskey is to ensure the quality and consistency of our Stranahan's original, of our Diamond Peak, of the sherry cask finish, and ensure that that's always consistent on our national market. With Snowflake, this is just fun.
While Rob and I were talking inside Friday afternoon, the line kept growing outside the distillery.
The first day we were here by ourselves. Russell didn't actually get here until that night, overnight. And so we had the day to ourselves and mainly setting up camp, having, the kind of things you typically do on a camping trip. And when it came time for dinner, we had a couple of nice big ribeyes and some pan-fried potatoes and some sautéed mushrooms. And we were eating like kings on a sidewalk. But once people started to show up, what typically happens in line, and what I really like about it is the camaraderie. So you sit down and you chat with each other, you catch up with them since you saw them last year, and you talk about things that you've run across in your travels. If I see a unique bottle, I bring it home with me if I'm out on a business trip or whatever. And, typically we'll bring those kind of things to share. And so, not all day long necessarily, but, we're out tasting and we're cooking for each other. So Russell was in our place Thursday night cooking burritos. We had chili dogs yesterday that somebody else cooked, and we ordered pizza in a couple of times. But last night we had a really, really raucous poker game right there, and just had a lot of fun, just spending time with each other. I didn't know how to play Texas Hold'em, and I learned last night. Yep.
Early Saturday morning, with the temperature right around freezing, the line stretched all the way down the block, around the corner, back up through the alley for the entire block, and then curled around the parking lot, while the staff gathered in the bar for a few final words from Rob Dietrich.
All right, y'all, this is going to be the best Snowflake ever. Yeah! This is all to you. Cheers!
And with that, Rob walked out to the front of the line, where Mike, Derek, Lynn, Russell, Jenna, and a few hundred of their closest friends were waiting.
Nice. You guys ready for some whiskey?
Yes.
All right. So we're gonna bring you guys inside. We got a whiskey station on the way in. You get to try a little of the sherry cask finish. Have you guys heard about that yet?
Oh yeah, it's great.
We got a little jam for you guys to be able to try in there, and let's roll in. Yeah.
They went through the distillery, paid $100 per bottle, and at the end of the line, Rob Dietrich was waiting to sign their bottles. Mike Kirchhoff checked off that item on his bucket list with bottles number 1 and 2.
Oh, I feel great. It was worth it. We waited in line since Wednesday. Now we've got number 1, number 2, number 6, and number 7.
What happened to 3 and 4?
Oh, there were a couple people in between me and my wife. So 3 and 4, my buddy Derek is getting signed right now. And then Russell was behind him, and then my wife. So we're all excited. We want to sit down and have a drink, warm up. We're good to go.
Are you going to save number 1 and 2, or are you going to drink them, or what are you going to do?
Oh, I'm going to crack them. Yeah, I'm going to crack. Certainly going to crack open one of them. I'm not sure which one, but I'm going to crack one of them. So I can't wait. In fact, I might do it in here.
We know now that Mike will not be cracking open bottle number 1, and the reason might surprise you. Remember when Russell Condon helped Mike's family move that couch and then bought them breakfast Thursday morning too? Mike felt a bit bad about beating Russell to the first spot in line, especially since Russell's Snowflake collection is made up of almost all bottles number 1 or 2. So before they all hit the road, Mike traded bottle number 1 to Russell in exchange for Russell's bottle number 9. And they both went home happy. Full disclosure, I was in Denver this weekend as a guest of Stranahan's, though, as always, full editorial control over the content of this segment remains with WhiskyCast. And that's this week's WhiskyCast In-Depth, brought to you by Lagavulin. Looking for a holiday gift that has a little something extra? Think about the Lagavulin Distillers Edition single malt, 16 years old and double matured in ex-sherry casks for a special touch. Find out more at your local whiskey shop or visit malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. Let's start off with the 2017 Snowflake release from Stranahan's. It's nicknamed Quandary Point after one of Colorado's 14,000-foot mountain peaks. It's bottled at 47% ABV. The nose is sweet with brown sugar, molasses, vanilla, and honey. The taste is spicy with clove and cinnamon notes that dominate the palate, while honey, vanilla, and brown sugar notes underneath add a nice balance and consistency. The finish is long with gently fading spices. It's a very nice whiskey, and I'm scoring the 2017 Stranahan's Snowflake Edition a 92. Let's also look at the Stranahan's Sherry Cask Edition that I discussed with Rob Dietrich. It's a 4-year-old Stranahan's single malt that's then finished in ex-Oloroso sherry casks and bottled at 47% ABV. The nose has notes of black cherries, raisins, almond oil, molasses, and a touch of straw. The taste has a good balance of honey, black cherries, blackberry preserves, and hints of figs, almonds, clove, and white pepper. The finish is long and smooth with vanilla, honey, caramel, and lingering spices. I'm scoring the Stranahan's Sherry Cask a 92. More tasting notes in just a minute, but first, this week's tasting notes are brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery, makers of Whiskey Advocate's 2017 Whiskey of the Year, Elijah Craig Barrel Proof. The 12-year-old barrel proof bourbon was pitted blind against competition from around the globe and was consistently ranked number 1 by the magazine's testers. Meet the whole Elijah Craig family at heavenhilldistillery.com. Think wisely, drink wisely. I managed to get my hands on one of the first samples of the Johnnie Walker Blue Label Ghost and Rare Edition that I mentioned during the news. And as I noted then, this one features whiskeys from the Silent Brora, Pittyvake, and Cambus distilleries, along with malts from Clynelish, Royal Lochnagar, Glenkinchie, and Glenlawsey, and grain whiskey from Cameron Bridge. It's bottled at 46% ABV. The nose is smooth and aromatic with touches of dark chocolate, citrus fruits, honey, and just a hint of hazelnut. The taste has a great balance of subtle spices with white pepper and ginger, complemented nicely by pineapple, clementine oranges, and dark chocolate. The finish is long and gentle with just a subtle whiff of campfire smoke. I'm scoring the Johnnie Walker Blue Label Ghost and Rare Edition a 94. This week's tasting notes are brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery, and I'll be adding them to our searchable list of more than 2,000 whiskeys from around the world at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find links for WhiskyCast HD and the WhiskyCast Tasting Panel podcasts, the week's whiskey news, our calendar of events, cocktail recipes, and a whole lot more, including a complete archive of all of our past episodes. Please take a minute this week and leave feedback or a rating for WhiskyCast on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you download your podcasts from. Those ratings do get figured into search results that can help other whiskey lovers discover WhiskyCast when they're looking for content. Of course, the easiest way to help other whiskey lovers discover WhiskyCast is by telling them yourselves. Share the show with a friend this week, too. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr at WhiskyCast. My email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
You don't need a special occasion to celebrate with something truly unique. But a personally engraved bottle of Johnnie Walker Blue Label can make any occasion special. Support for WhiskyCast comes from Johnnie Walker. Visit johnnywalker.com to find out more about engraving options near you.
WhiskyCast, brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2017. and comes to you each week from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.